The most feared mafia king in Seoul lost all emotions after being poisoned. He was nothing more than a stone statue with a beating heart, until one Nigerian nurse placed her hand on his wrist, and his dead body suddenly reacted like a lightning strike, like it had been waiting for her touch his entire life. In a penthouse suite that felt more like a high-tech surgical theater than a home, Kang Ji Hune lay motionless. He was shirtless, his heavily muscled chest crisscrossed with thin black wires leading to medical electrodes. The glow of monitors was the only real light in the dim room, casting his perfectly sculpted features in shades of cold blue. Two doctors in impeccable suits whispered anxiously near the foot of the bed. His body works. His mind works. The first doctor, older and trembling, adjusted his glasses. But his emotions, he has none. Ji Hune was 29, the undisputed heir of the Korean-Mafia syndicate, a name whispered in fear from the ports of Busan to the back alleys of Gangnam. Yet, here he was, staring blankly at the ceiling, eyes the color of old marble. There was no fear in them, no anger, no desire. There was nothing. 3 years ago, he had survived an assassination attempt by poison. The toxin hadn't killed him, but it had done something far more chilling. It had burned out the neural pathways responsible for feeling. He was a breathing corpse, a tactical genius devoid of a soul, ruling the underworld with a terrifying, absolute objectivity that surpassed any human rage. A low, rhythmic beep from the nearest machine was the only sound Ji Hune truly heard. He felt no pain, but he felt no comfort either. He knew he was alive, but the world was a dull, static hum he merely observed. The door slid open, and a man in a crisp navy suit, Minso, stepped in. Minso was Ji Hune's cousin and trusted right-hand man, but his eyes held a subtle, calculating glint that the emotionless Ji Hune could never perceive. "The new nurse has arrived, Ji Hune," Minso said, his voice smooth and professional. "She's a temporary exchange from Africa. A specialist in post-trauma neurological care." Ji Hune didn't shift his gaze from the ceiling. "Send her in. Protocol remains the same. 1 week. If she fails, dismiss her." Minso nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, hidden by the shadows. "Of course, cousin." The Kong Hotel was not just a place of luxury. It was the polished, opulent facade of the Kong Syndicate's operations. Ada Okonquo stepped out of the black taxi, blinking against the harsh lights of the neon sign above. She clutched the strap of her small duffel bag, a Bible tucked securely inside. Ada was 26, a registered nurse from Nigeria, and utterly unprepared for the gravity of her new assignment. She was on a temporary exchange program, expecting a demanding but professional posting in a high-end rehabilitation facility. The lobby was marble and gold, silent and vast. But it wasn't the opulence that caught her attention, it was the silence. And the eyes. The moment she checked in at the private counter, every head in the waiting area, all men in immaculate suits, snapped toward her. Their stares were cold, possessive, and utterly unnerving. A foreigner. A Christian, judging by the silver cross necklace she wore. Pure. Soft. Sweet. In a place ruled by devils, she looked like a lamb led to the slaughterhouse. The manager, a severe woman with a tightly pulled hairstyle, escorted Ada to the top floor. "You have been assigned to Mr. Kang's private care," the manager intoned, her voice flat. "The rules are simple. You speak only when spoken to. You do not ask questions. You do not touch anything outside the required medical duties. And you never, ever, mention the organization." "The organization?" Ada asked softly, her brow furrowing. The manager stopped dead and turned, her expression turning glacial. "Mr. Kang Ji Hune is a businessman. You are his nurse. That is all." Ada swallowed hard, feeling a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This was not a normal assignment. This was a prison. The suite was vast, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive sandalwood. Ada was led into the main living area, where Ji Hune lay on a sophisticated medical bed near a wall of bulletproof glass. He was shirtless, the smooth, cold expanse of his skin a stark contrast to the luxurious silk sheets. He was even more intimidating up close, a masterpiece of genetic luck and brutal self-discipline. He didn't move. He didn't acknowledge her presence. "Mr. Kang, I am Ada Okonquo," she began, her voice professional despite the tremor she felt. "I will be overseeing your neurological and physical therapy starting today." Still nothing. His eyes, fixed on the rain-streaked glass, remained vacant. Ada took a slow, deep breath. She retrieved a sterile pad, moved toward the bed, and reached for his wrist to check his pulse and skin temperature, a routine baseline test. Her fingers, warm and gentle, settled lightly against the hard, unyielding bone of his wrist. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Ji Hune's entire body gave a terrifying, visceral jerk, as if a massive jolt of electricity had slammed through his system. The closest medical machine, the cardiac monitor, instantly spiked, a harsh, screaming line of erratic activity. His breathing, which had been slow and metronomic, hitched and sharpened into ragged gasps. His marble eyes, dead for 3 years, snapped down to her hand. They were wide, horrified, and impossibly filled with a chaotic, newborn intensity. For the first time since the poison, Kang Ji Hune felt something. It was heat. It was pain. It was a terrifying, almost primal rush of adrenaline. But beneath it all, tearing through the numbness, was a raw, undeniable spark of desire. He didn't simply move his hand. He snatched it away from her as if burned, pulling it back to his chest, his fingers digging into his own skin. Ada was frozen, terrified by the sudden surge of life and violence in the man who had been a statue seconds before. The beeping of the monitor seemed deafening. I am so sorry, Mr. Kang, she stammered, pulling back quickly. I didn't mean to startle you. Are you in pain? Ji Hune was breathing deeply, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He didn't answer. He simply stared at her. His gaze was no longer vacant. It was laser-focused, dissecting her face, her eyes, her delicate hands, as if she were the first sunrise he had seen in years. He felt the heat in his cheeks. He felt the terrifying, unfamiliar tightness in his chest. And he felt the desperate, magnetic urge to have her touch him again. This should not be possible. Minso burst back into the room, alerted by the monitor's alarm. What happened? Ji Hune, are you hurt? Ji Hune held up a trembling hand, halting Minso instantly. He looked at Ada one last time, a cold, calculating expression already replacing the shock, then slowly settled back onto the sheets. Leave us, he rasped, the roughness of his voice betraying the recent struggle. Minso hesitated, glancing between the distraught nurse and his shaken cousin. But the monitor. I said leave. Minso bowed stiffly and retreated, his jaw tight. As soon as the door closed, Ji Hune sat up fully. He reached for a glass of water, but his hand was still shaking too much, and he slammed it back onto the side table. He pressed the intercom button on the wall. His voice, usually a flat monotone, was low and urgent. Retrieve Investigator 3. Immediate priority. I want a full profile on the new nurse, Ada Okonquo. Everything. Financial records, academic history, family ties, and especially the precise nature of the exchange program that brought her here. He paused, a terrifying, new intensity in his gaze. How does her touch awaken me? Who sent her? I want to know if she is part of a deeper enemy plot. I want results within 12 hours. The line clicked dead. He was convinced. No ordinary human touch could bypass the pharmacological block in his brain. She had to be a tool, a weapon designed by a rival syndicate to manipulate him through a manufactured emotional trigger. He had to uncover her purpose before he broke protocol and dragged her into his bed. Meanwhile, downstairs in the surveillance room, Minso sat at a bank of screens. He intercepted the digital priority tag sent to Investigator 3. He accessed the command. He read the details of the request. He pulled up Ada's file, her simple life in Lagos, her top-tier training, her Christian family, her naive reason for coming to Seoul. Minso smiled, a slow, dangerous curl of the lip. He selected the command delete all. The inquiry went out, but the results that returned to Ji Hune's primary database were a blank page, accompanied by a system failure notification. Minso leaned back, watching a hidden camera feed of Ada in the staff lounge, nervously drinking tea. You are not a weapon of my enemy, my sweet Ada, he murmured to the screen, his obsession unsettling. You are simply my cousin's new weakness. And a weakness is something I can exploit. The following morning, Ada arrived for her shift feeling sick with dread. The experience with Ji Hune the night before had been traumatic. He was beautiful, yes, but he felt like an earthquake waiting to happen. She found Minso waiting for her in the hallway. Ji Hune requires your continued service, Minso said smoothly. He was impressed with your unique skill set. I don't think I'm suited for this posting, Ada replied, twisting her hands together. He seems incredibly stressed, and my presence clearly agitated him. Minso leaned closer, his expression suddenly intimate. Agitated? Or perhaps awakened? You are the only person who has managed to break through his coldness since the poisoning. He needs you, Ada. He intimidated her, frightened her, and the raw, hungry look in Ji Hune's eyes had sent genuine fear through her. But Minso continued, hitting her where she was most vulnerable. The pay for his full-time, dedicated care is 5 times your current contract. You know what that money means for your mother and your younger siblings back home. It's a year's wages. Ada's resolve crumbled. The promise of security for her family outweighed her personal terror. She swallowed her pride and her fear. I accept, Mr. Minso. Good girl, Minso said, the possessiveness in his voice masked by a quick, charming smile. Ji Hune had Ada moved into a secure, luxurious room adjacent to his suite. He requested her as his full-time, private nurse, making her the only person permitted to enter his personal space unsupervised. He didn't touch her again for the first week. He didn't have to. Every time she came within a foot of him, the air in the room thickened. Every time she spoke, he listened with an unnatural intensity, filing away the soft cadence of her Nigerian accent, the way her eyes crinkled when she frowned. She became the only person allowed to touch him during therapy. The only one who made him feel anything at all. When her hand grazed his skin while administering a saline drip, he felt a flicker of heat. When she helped him sit up and her shoulder briefly brushed his, he felt a sharp, almost overwhelming spike of awareness. This dependence on her touch, this frightening new vulnerability, began to terrify him more than the poison had. Danger began to grow. Not from the outside, but from the terrifying internal chaos Ada had unleashed in the most feared man in Seoul. The daily physical therapy sessions became rituals of escalating tension. One afternoon, Ada was administering a breathing test. She placed her warm, small hand squarely on the center of his muscular back, urging him to take a deep, slow breath. Ji Hune was wearing only a thin hospital gown. Her heat instantly leached through the fabric, sinking into his flesh. He didn't just feel a flicker this time. He felt a deep, shaking shudder run through his entire body, starting where her hand pressed into his back and spiraling into a nervous tension he hadn't known was possible. Again, Mr. Kang, Ada instructed, her voice soft but firm. Slower. He tried, but his lungs refused to obey. His breath was shallow, shaky. Are you all right? She asked, her concern genuine. He just shook his head, unable to speak, the sensation of her hand on his back overwhelming his senses. It felt like being brought back to life, molecule by agonizing molecule. Another time, she was adjusting the collar of his suit jacket before a mandatory meeting with the elders. As she reached up, her fingers brushed the buttons of his starched shirt, right over his heart. His breath snagged in his throat. His entire body went rigid. He looked down at her, the usual distance in his eyes replaced by a scorching, desperate hunger. Ada looked up, realizing her hands were pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. She immediately pulled them away, her cheeks flooding with color. Forgive me, Mr. Kang, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I was only straightening your collar. Ji Hune backed her up against the wall of the suite, his immense presence suddenly dominating her. His hands came up, not to touch her, but to brace the wall on either side of her head, trapping her. His face was only inches from hers. His breath was hot and ragged against her skin. His voice, usually clipped and cold, cracked with a raw, emotional intensity that shocked her. Don't touch me, he ground out, his eyes locked on her trembling lips. Unless you're ready for what it does to me. Ada's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was terrified, but beneath the fear was a strange, thrilling confusion. She was breathing as hard as he was, her entire focus locked on the devastating proximity of the king of the Korean underworld. She pushed past him, her own body trembling uncontrollably. I must check the monitors, she stammered, fleeing the suite without waiting for his reply. Ji Hune didn't follow her. He leaned against the wall where she had been standing, his eyes closed. The scent of her, clean, slightly floral, and entirely alive, still lingered in the air. He watched her leave on the security feed, his expression no longer cold but starved. He knew he should fire her. He knew she was a dangerous anomaly. But the silence she left behind was louder, colder, and more terrifying than the silence of 3 years ago. Ada spent the next 24 hours avoiding Ji Hune, performing only the most essential duties with shaking hands. She tried to convince herself the intensity she saw in his eyes was merely frustration over his condition. She was outside the staff kitchen that evening when Minso cornered her. You look distraught, Ada. He was all polished concern, leaning close to her. I am fine, Mr. Minso. No, you are not. You are walking a very dangerous line, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential whisper. I see the way he looks at you. I know you think you are helping him. Ada shifted uncomfortably. I am helping him. Minso laughed, a short, humorless sound. Ji Hune doesn't need a nurse. He needs a psychiatrist. He is dangerous. He is a killer. A true monster who destroys any woman who gets too close to the flame of his world. He stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over her face. You are too pure for this place, Ada. Too sweet. I understand the money is important, but your soul is worth more. He leaned in, his words a venomous plea. Leave this place. Take your severance pay, return to your family, and forget you ever saw Kang Ji Hune. Before he ruins you. Ada listened, her mind reeling from the sincerity in his voice. Minso was trying to protect her. He was showing a human kindness that was utterly absent in Ji Hune's terrifying intensity. But then she remembered Ji Hune's moment of terror, his breath catching, the way his hand had trembled when she touched him. He wasn't just a monster. He was a deeply wounded, broken man trapped in a cold cage. A cage she seemed to hold the key to. Thank you for your warning, Mr. Minso, she said, her voice soft but resolute. But my contract is for 6 months. I cannot abandon my duty. Minso's expression didn't change, yet a shift occurred in the depth of his eyes. He smiled. It wasn't the charming, professional smile she had seen before. It was dangerous, possessive, and dripping with a jealous resentment she couldn't possibly understand. Very well, Ada. Duty comes first, always, he said, turning away. But as he walked down the hallway, he didn't look back at her. He looked back at the closed door of Ji Hune's suite, a predator who had just marked his territory. If you are already captivated by this dark romance, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for the next thrilling installment. What do you think Ji Hune will do next? Tell us in the comments below. The quiet influence of Ada Okonquo could not be confined to a single suite forever. The Kang Syndicate was not a corporation. It was an empire, and empires were built on eyes and ears in every corner. It took 6 weeks, but the Mafia elders finally noticed. The elders were a cabal of aging men, the architects of the syndicate's wealth and terror, who had held the reins of power since Ji Hune's poisoning left him a functional automaton. They met in a secluded tea house outside the city, the air heavy with tradition and malice. He smiled, reported Elder Kim, his voice tight with disbelief. Ji Hune was watching the surveillance feed of the nurse yesterday, and he smiled. A genuine human expression. Elder Park, the most ancient and ruthless of the group, slammed his teacup down. The delicate porcelain shattered. This is not good. Not good at all. His lack of feeling was his prison and our shield. The panic in the room was palpable. They had enjoyed 3 years of absolute control, ruling through the cold, emotionless figurehead who never questioned their motives. But if Ji Hune could feel again, he might remember the night of the poisoning. He might recall the bitter conversation they had before the glass was switched. He might remember who had betrayed him and why. Their entire framework of power would crumble. Minso was summoned immediately. He arrived looking grave and dutiful, bowing low before the table. Minso, your cousin has grown unstable, Elder Park decreed, his eyes like chips of granite. The foreign woman has awakened something in him we cannot allow to thrive. If he recovers his emotional memory, our position is forfeit. Minso's expression remained perfectly neutral. What is your instruction, respected elders? Remove the girl, Elder Kim ordered, his voice flat and absolute. Permanently. She is a threat to the stability of the syndicate. Handle it quietly tonight. Minso met the gaze of the oldest elder, his own eyes holding a depth of coldness that rivaled Ji Hune's former stare. It will be done, elders. Stability is paramount. He bowed and left the tea house. But as he drove back toward the city, Minso gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His plan was not to kill her. Killing Ada meant removing the only thing that occupied Ji Hune's mind, forcing his cousin's focus back onto the elders, and back onto the events of the poisoning. No, Minso's plan was to ruin her, to eliminate her from the equation not through death, but through complete, devastating destruction of her credibility, making her utterly worthless to Ji Hune. Then he could have her, or at least watch her suffer alone. The dangerous, jealous smile returned to his face as he drove faster through the night. The tension between Ada and Ji Hune had become a suffocating atmosphere in the suite. They spoke only in measured tones about vitals and medication, but the silence between treatments was loud with unacknowledged desire. One evening, nearly midnight, the rain began again, a sudden explosive downpour. Ada was in her adjacent room, reviewing charts, when the panic alarm in Ji Hune's suite began to blare. She ran in without hesitation. Ji Hune was thrashing, his body convulsing in a full-blown panic attack. His hands were tearing at the sheets, his face slick with cold sweat. The poison had left him prone to these neurological breakdowns, but they were rare. This one was far more violent than she had ever witnessed. "Mr. Kang, breathe. You must breathe with me." Ada rushed to his side, ignoring all fear. He was past listening. His chest was tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide and vacant again, staring through her into a dark memory. Ada acted purely on instinct. She climbed onto the bed, placing one hand gently on his frantic chest, and used the other to firmly cup the back of his neck, pulling his head forward toward her. "Look at me, Ji Hune," she commanded, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through the noise of the monitors. She didn't use the formal title. She used his name, simple and direct. "Look at me. Focus on my face. You are safe. You are here now. Follow my breathing." Her face was inches from his. The storm outside was mirroring the chaos in his lungs. Her breath was steady, warm, and comforting against his mouth. He was shaking violently, his entire world narrowing down to the soft scent of her, the pressure of her hand on his neck, and the desperate, unwavering focus in her dark, compassionate eyes. The chaos in his mind began to subside, replaced by the terrifying, exquisite sensation of her. He was drowning, and she was the only anchor. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, with the raw edge of fear still gripping his throat, the distance that had always defined their relationship snapped. The intense, hungry spark that had ignited the moment she first touched him turned into a scorching, desperate wildfire. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He simply moved. Ji Hune seized the back of her head, his hands suddenly fierce, and pulled her down. He kissed her. Hard. Desperate. Hungry. It was not a soft exploration. It was a physical demand, a collision of needs. It was the frantic consumption of the only drug that could silence the terror in his soul. He poured 3 years of deadened emotion into that one crushing press of his mouth against hers. Ada's body went rigid with shock. She was pinned beneath his intensity, overwhelmed by the sudden, possessive heat. The taste of him, clean, metallic, intensely male, flooded her senses. She felt the frantic beat of his heart beneath her hand and the shocking, electrifying jolt of desire that erupted in her own body. This was not a patient. This was the Mafia king, claiming his territory. After a long, agonizing moment, Ada broke away, pulling her head back with a sharp gasp. She was trembling, her lips swollen, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. "I shouldn't have," she stammered, pulling her hand away from his chest. Her voice was thin, wrecked. "I'm your nurse. This is wrong." Ji Hune's eyes were still dark, focused. He reached up, his thumb brushing the corner of her trembling mouth. He was calmer now, the panic attack completely banished, replaced by a singular, consuming awareness of her. He whispered, his voice dangerously low and full of newly recovered emotion. The coldness was gone, replaced by a fever. "You're my cure." Ada couldn't breathe. She scrambled off the bed, stumbling backward until her shoulder hit the cold wall. That word, cure, was the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. It meant he didn't want her as a woman, he wanted her as a necessity. She ran, leaving the suite, leaving the lingering ghost of the kiss, leaving Ji Hune alone in the darkness. He let her, but only because the new, terrifying feeling of possessiveness told him she would come back. She had to. He would make sure of it. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you think Ada should run or stay and face this dangerous love. Minso moved with the stealth and efficiency of a true viper. While Ji Hune was dealing with the blinding chaos of his newfound emotions, Minso was setting his trap. The forged file was a masterpiece of digital deception. It was a proof that Ada was not a simple exchange nurse, but a highly trained asset. The document claimed she was hired by the rival Jawa syndicate to execute a long-term manipulation plan. To seduce, gain the trust of, and ultimately manipulate Ji Hune using a synthesized neurostimulant disguised as a simple touch. The file detailed large payments deposited into a dummy account, corresponding exactly to the high salary Ada had accepted. It included fake communication logs suggesting she had been reporting on Ji Hune's emotional state since her arrival. Minso slipped the encrypted file onto Ji Hune's private office server during the early hours of the morning, knowing his cousin would check his security logs first thing. Ji Hune found it shortly after Ada's panicked flight. He was still reeling from the devastating intensity of their kiss, the physical pleasure and terrifying, foreign love blooming in his chest. He felt human, vulnerable, exposed. It was a sensation he hated, and yet one he craved. He logged into his system, searching for anything, any piece of information, to justify his new, overwhelming obsession with her. When the file opened, his world stopped. He read the document once, then twice, his mind trying desperately to reconcile the warmth of her mouth with the coldness of the printout. The Jaewa Syndicate. Synthesized neurostimulant. Manipulation. The date of her hospital transfer request matched the hiring date on the forged papers exactly. It looked too real. It explained everything. It explained the inexplicable rush of feeling, the immediate effect of her touch, the sudden surge of vulnerability that had almost made him weep. It wasn't love. It was a mechanism. She wasn't a cure. She was a clever, calculated weapon, designed to make the emotionless Mafia king soft and easy to kill. The crushing, exhilarating joy he had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a devastating cold fury that was far darker than his initial numbness. This wasn't the old Ji Hune, emotionless and objective. This was the new Ji Hune, full of rage and betrayal. He summoned her. Ada walked into the suite, her heart already racing, ready to apologize for the kiss, ready to resign if necessary. Ji Hune was standing in the center of the room, impeccably dressed, but his stillness was unnerving. He didn't look at her, but at the digital file floating on the holographic display near him. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice low, dangerously calm. Ada glanced at the screen. She didn't understand the technical jargon, but she saw the words Jaewa and Syndicate and the mention of her name. I don't know what that is, Mr. Kang," she whispered. "I've never heard of that group." "Stop lying," he said, turning, his eyes burning with a freezing intensity that made her physically recoil. "You came here knowing your touch would affect me. You manipulated my elders into giving you this position. The money you accepted, the timing of your transfer, it all fits." "No. I swear before God, I came here for my job," Ada pleaded, tears already welling up. "I took the contract because of my family. I know nothing about a syndicate." The desperation in her voice was real, but Ji Hune, hardened by years of underworld lies and now poisoned by Minso's expertly crafted deception, couldn't hear it. The kiss, the vulnerability, the sudden, intoxicating rush of humanity, it all felt cheap and disgusting. It was a controlled experiment he had foolishly mistaken for a miracle. "You made me feel again," he said, his voice laced with venom. "You gave me back my soul just so you could watch me bleed. That is the greatest cruelty." He walked toward the door, his movements sharp and final. He didn't touch her. He didn't even look back. "Leave the Kong Tower," he commanded. "Now, if you are found on my property in 1 hour, the Jaewa Syndicate will be the least of your problems." He dismissed her. Ada stood there, silent, broken. The love and fear that had tied her to him shattered into a million pieces. She finally understood Minso's warning. This truly was the monster. He had allowed himself to feel for a moment, and the first thing he felt was betrayal, which he immediately inflicted upon her. She turned and left the suite, walking toward the elevators, every step shaking with despair. The tears she shed were not just for the lost job, but for the impossible, dangerous spark she had foolishly believed was shared. Ada's scent, a faint, lingering whisper of jasmine and hope, was the last thing to leave the suite. And as the door clicked shut behind her, the absolute cold vacuum of the room rushed back in, colder and more paralyzing than before. Ji Hune stood motionless for a long time, the fury that had driven him melting away, leaving behind a terrible, gaping emptiness. He had felt nothing for 3 years, and now, after 2 weeks of terrifying, exhilarating awareness, he was back to nothingness. Only this time, he knew exactly what he was missing. He collapsed onto the edge of his bed, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. He had accused her of being a weapon, a manipulator. He had let the sight of a document, a piece of paper, dictate his heart. Then the true horror began. Ada's abrupt departure, the sharp, final cut of her presence, had shocked his system even more profoundly than her initial touch. It was the shock that broke the final seal. A flash of memory, violent and immediate, slammed into his mind. It wasn't visual, but auditory. He heard Minso's voice, smooth, practiced, laughing, saying something he couldn't quite make out, standing too close to the bar. Then, the distinct, delicate sound of a glass being switched on the lacquered wood counter. A soft, calculating smirk on his cousin's face, reflected in the condensation of the glass. the smell of the strange, acrid perfume Minso's lover always wore. And finally, the moment Ji Hune himself collapsed onto the floor, the cold paralyzing his lungs, his last thought being the sound of Minso leaning over him, whispering, "You should have known better than to trust your own blood, cousin." The realization didn't hit like a bullet. It hit like an explosion. It was Minso, his own family, his cousin, his supposed right-hand man, the one who had so smoothly advised him on Ada, the one who had looked at him with such concerned devotion for 3 years. Minso hadn't poisoned him to kill him, only to disable him, to turn him into a walking corpse, leaving the syndicate ripe for Minso to seize control slowly, without bloodshed. Minso had enjoyed the power Ji Hune's numbness had granted him. And Minso's motive for the forgery? It wasn't just about protecting the elders. It was about possession. Minso saw how Ada had awakened Ji Hune. He wanted her gone, completely ruined, so she could never be used as a cure, and perhaps, so he could claim her himself once she was sufficiently destroyed. Ada was never part of the plan. She was never the enemy. She was his salvation. Ji Hune roared, a sound that was pure, visceral, rediscovered rage. The years of numbness had vanished, replaced by a torrent of blood-curdling fury aimed at the betrayal of his own flesh and blood. He felt the sickening, nauseating shame of having thrown away the only person who had saved him, based on the lie of the traitor standing beside him. Ji Hune didn't bother with the elevator. He took the emergency stairs down 22 flights to the lowest, most restricted level of the Kong Tower. The reinforced basement, Minso's private control center. He kicked the steel door off its hinges. Minso was waiting. He sat calmly at his desk, surrounded by monitors showing various security feeds, including the one still fixed on Ada's hurried, tearful departure from the hotel lobby. In his hand, Minso held a sleek, black-silenced pistol, aimed casually at the entrance. "You took your time, cousin," Minso said, his voice dropping the professional veneer and becoming something sinister and coiled. "I knew the moment she left, the memories would flood back. Your mind needed to believe in her guilt first." Ji Hune stepped into the room, ignoring the gun aimed at his chest. His eyes were burning, truly alive for the first time in years, and filled with such absolute murderous intent that Minso involuntarily shifted back in his chair. "The file," Ji Hune said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Where is the original source?" "There is no source," Minso chuckled, rising slowly. "I created it. I am much better at manipulation than you ever were, Ji Hune. Poisoning you was easy. Keeping you docile was easier. But destroying the little foreign nurse who dared to touch what was mine, that was the true challenge." Ji Hune didn't speak again. He moved. The fight was brutal. It wasn't the practiced, clinical violence of a mafia hit. It was a bone-breaking, rage-filled, personal struggle between two men who shared blood but not souls. Ji Hune moved with the efficiency of years of training, but now fueled by a human rage that made him unstoppable. Minso fired the gun. The silence pop was swallowed by the concrete room. But Ji Hune had already closed the distance. The bullet grazed his shoulder, but he barely flinched. He tackled Minso through the monitor bank. Glass and sparks exploded. Ji Hune was on top of him, raining down blows. He used his fists, his knees, the environment. Every punch was meant to erase the smirk, the deceit, the 3 years of stolen life. Minso was trained, but he was no match for the beast he had unwittingly healed. Finally, Minso lay gasping on the floor, his face a mask of blood and terror, his body broken and likely several bones shattered. Ji Hune stood over him, breathing heavily, blood dripping from his shoulder and Minso's broken nose. He grabbed Minso by the hair, dragging his head back until their eyes locked. "You touched what's mine," Ji Hune whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying blend of coldness and devastation. "You tried to steal my life. And you tried to take my cure." He slammed Minso's head back against the concrete floor. Minso groaned, spitting blood. Ji Hune stared at his own hands, red with his cousin's blood. He could kill him. He wanted to. But the new, painful, human part of his brain, the part Ada had awakened, told him that true destruction was a slower game. "This is mercy," Ji Hune spat, releasing Minso's hair. "But the next time you interfere, I will feed you to the wolves you thought you controlled." He left Minso barely breathing in the wreckage, the sound of his ragged, broken wheezing echoing in the dark basement. Ji Hune had to find her. The thought was a searing imperative, overriding the pain of his injury. He was bleeding, his suit ripped, but he didn't care. He was terrified that he was too late, that the elders had acted, or that she had simply disappeared forever. He tracked her easily. She had only made it to the Seoul National Hospital, where her exchange program was based. Ji Hune stormed into the staff lounge, ignoring the terrified looks of the night shift nurses. Ada was sitting on a folding cot, her small duffel bag packed, ready to leave the country in the morning. She was holding her Bible, tears silently streaming down her face. She looked utterly defeated, broken by the man she had tried to save. When she looked up and saw him, bloodied, disheveled, but radiating an intense, desperate energy, she flinched, pulling back instantly. "Ji Hune," she whispered, the formality gone. He walked across the small room and did the unimaginable. The Mafia king, the man who had ordered executions without blinking, the man who knew nothing but conquest, dropped to his knees in front of her. He knelt, his ripped, stained trousers pressed against the linoleum floor. His head was bowed, not in shame, but in absolute, profound apology. "I know the truth," he said, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "Minso. He orchestrated the documents. He poisoned me 3 years ago. The poison took my feelings. The lies took my sense. He reached out, his hand shaking, not to grab her, but to plead. He tried to take you because you made me feel again. He made me believe you were a weapon because he knew that emotion, betrayal, was the only way to drive you away." Ada watched him, unable to move, unable to breathe. A Mafia king kneeling for a nurse. It was impossible. "I deserve your hatred," he continued, lifting his head slightly, his eyes burning with genuine pain. "But I cannot go back to the darkness. Not now. Not after I felt you." He took her small, trembling hands in his own. His hands were still warm with Minso's blood. "I feel everything now," he confessed, the admission torn from his soul. "Fear, rage, shame, and this terrifying, agonizing need. It is all only real when you are near. You are not a cure, Ada. You are life." Ada cried massive, racking sobs of relief and disbelief. The pain of the betrayal had been almost unbearable, but the sincerity of his raw, desperate apology was crushing. She saw the rage in his eyes, yes, but she also saw the shattering vulnerability beneath it. The man she had always suspected was wounded, now fully exposed. "You believed a piece of paper over my word," she managed, her voice thick with tears. "You chose the monster over the man I was trying to heal." "I am a monster," he admitted instantly. "But you are the only one who can keep the beast caged. Please, Ada, forgive me. I will burn the city down to keep you safe. Just tell me you will come back." She looked at the blood on his knuckles, the desperation in his gaze. She saw the true price of the feeling she had given him. He had fought a brutal war the moment she left, and he had come straight to her, broken and begging. Ada slowly pulled her hands free and used them to cup his bloodied face. "I forgive you," she whispered, the words shaking with a love she couldn't deny. "But you will not just keep me safe. You will listen to me." Ji Hune closed his eyes in immense relief. "Anything. I will give you anything." She stood, and he rose with her. She looked up at the king, her king now, stained with violence, saved by grace. "Then take me home," she said. She returned with him. Not as his nurse, but as his undeniable, terrifying weakness. The moment of truth. She forgave him. If you're hooked on this intense story, smash that subscribe button and tell me, was Ada right to forgive him so quickly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We're entering the final, war-filled act now. Ji Hune brought Ada back to the Kang Tower, not to her adjacent nurse quarters, but to his private master bedroom. He dismissed the entire staff, stationed 4 perimeter guards whom he trusted absolutely, and locked himself and Ada inside. His shoulder wound was tended to, but the internal damage, the fear of losing her again, was far more crippling. He knew Minso had been neutralized, but the elders were still out there, already alerted to Ada's destructive potential. She was a foreign body, a catalyst, and she needed to be placed under the strongest shield known in the Syndicate's dark world. "We are getting married," Ji Hune announced, the moment the bleeding had been stopped. He stood over her, his eyes serious and demanding. Ada, still recovering from the emotional whiplash of the last 48 hours, looked up at him in shock. "Married? Ji Hune, we kissed once, and you thought I was a spy minutes later." "This is not about sentiment, Ada," he countered, though the tenderness in his gaze betrayed him. "This is about survival. If you are my nurse, you are disposable, a foreign asset the elders can eliminate without repercussion. If you are my wife, my blood, my queen, you are protected under Mafia law. To harm you is to declare war on me, personally, and the whole syndicate must sanction it." He knelt beside the bed, taking her hand. I need to bind you to me legally and eternally tonight. I need to make you untouchable. Ada looked at the intense devotion in his eyes, the absolute necessity of the move. She was terrified of his world, terrified of the danger, but she was no longer terrified of him. She saw not the king of the underworld, but the desperate man fighting to keep his only source of light. You are moving too fast, she whispered, her voice trembling. I have no time, Ji Hune stated fiercely. Every minute you are only Ada Okonquo, the nurse, is a minute you could die. He leaned in, kissing her forehead with a fierce gentleness she hadn't known he possessed. Say yes, Ada. Let me protect you. Ada closed her eyes, accepting the terrifying, wonderful leap of faith. She was already tied to him by the sudden, terrifying resurrection of his soul. Yes, she finally said. I will be your wife, Ji Hune. Within the hour, the paperwork was signed by two trusted, high-ranking syndicate lawyers. A quiet, terrifying ceremony was held in the suite, witnessed only by the security detail and the lawyers. Ada wore a borrowed white dress that felt alien in the dark penthouse. Ji Hune wore a freshly pressed suit. They exchanged simple, platinum bands. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, Ji Hune's entire body relaxed, a tension leaving him that had lasted 3 years. She was hers. Safe. The elders erupted in fury. The news spread through the Seoul underworld like wildfire. Kang Ji Hune, the cold prince, the unfeeling heir, had suddenly married a foreign nurse. They knew immediately what this meant. This marriage was not an act of love. It was a brazen declaration of power. It strengthened Ji Hune's claim to absolute leadership, putting him beyond the reach of their manipulative counsel. The tea house was once again filled with the elders' rage. He dares to defy us, roared Elder Park, slamming his fist onto the table. He has circumvented our laws. She is his wife now. We cannot touch her under the code of blood. But the code has exceptions, Elder Kim reminded them, his eyes narrow and calculating. The code forbids the killing of the syndicate king's wife unless she produces an unsanctioned heir that threatens the stability of the line. An heir solidifies his power irrevocably. They looked at each other, the fear making them desperate. The threat was no longer Ada herself. The threat was the future she carried. She must be removed immediately, Elder Park commanded, his voice cold and final. We cannot risk a child. She must die before she produces an heir. Ji Hune was aware of the escalating threat. He moved Ada to a fortified villa on the outskirts of Seoul, surrounded by layers of high-tech security and his most loyal men. He rarely left her side, conducting the business of his dark empire from the secure compound. He learned to love in the shadows. He learned to feel joy in the quiet companionship of his wife. 2 months later, Ada learned she was pregnant. It was an accident, a terrifying, beautiful consequence of their sudden, desperate bond. She showed Ji Hune the positive test stick one quiet morning. Ji Hune looked at the tiny plastic strip, then at Ada, tears welling up in his eyes for the first time in his adult life. It wasn't sadness. It was pure, overwhelming, dizzying joy mixed with an immediate, paralyzing fear. A child. His heir. The ultimate confirmation of his fully restored soul. He knelt before her, burying his face in her stomach, holding her as if she might shatter. A daughter, he whispered, or a son. They will have your warmth, Ada. Your light. The secret was kept meticulously tight. Only a handful of trusted personnel and Ada's primary physician knew. But secrets in the Kang syndicate were like smoke. They always found a way out. The elders received the intelligence just 2 weeks later. The panic was instantaneous and absolute. Their chance for control was closing fast. They ordered her assassination, bypassing the code of blood entirely, declaring her death a necessity for the safety of the future of the organization. It was a cold, starless night. Ada was 4 months pregnant, resting comfortably in the main suite of the villa, while Ji Hune worked late in his home office nearby. The first sign of the attack was not a siren or a shout, but a low, guttural thud from the perimeter, followed by an immediate, chilling silence. Ji Hune's head snapped up from his documents. He didn't wait. He moved instantly, pulling the SIG Sauer P226 from the desk drawer and shoving it into the waistband of his trousers. Lockdown. Code red. He barked into the secure line, already running toward the bedroom. He reached Ada just as the reinforced glass door of the suite shattered inward. A figure, large and cloaked in black, stepped through the remnants of the frame. A professional hitman, armed and utterly silent. He held a custom-made submachine gun. His target was clearly Ada. Ji Hune didn't hesitate. He shoved Ada behind the heavy wardrobe, protecting her with his own body. Stay down. Don't move. He drew his pistol and fired 3 rounds with terrifying speed and precision. The hitman, shielded by tactical armor, barely staggered. He immediately opened fire, spraying the room with automatic rounds. The sound was deafening, sickening. Plaster, wood, and silk exploded around them. Ji Hune moved, furious, rabid, unhinged. He wasn't fighting a syndicate rival, he was defending his family. He emptied the rest of his clip, forcing the hitman to take cover behind a pillar. Ji Hune knew he couldn't win a gunfight against the armor. He ran for the doorway, drawing the killer's attention. Get out of here, you coward. As the hitman stepped into the hallway, Ji Hune slammed the door shut and triggered the emergency security function, locking the steel blast shields from his side. The hitman was trapped outside the suite, but still inside the house. The escape route, Ji Hune shouted, pulling Ada by the hand toward the private passage hidden behind the library wall. Ada, shaking but composed, followed him. The guards. Did they get the alarm? They were compromised, he stated grimly, hearing the sound of the hitman using a breaching charge on the reinforced door behind them. A professional job. Internal leak. We can't trust anyone. They scrambled down the dark, narrow passage, leading to a hidden garage. Ji Hune had already called his 2 most trusted men, loyalists since childhood, to meet them there. They reached the garage just as the reinforced door upstairs finally gave way. Ji Hune threw open the garage door. The 2 loyalists were waiting with a black armored sedan. Go! Drive! Ji Hune yelled at his men, shoving Ada into the back seat. He looked back toward the villa, hearing the heavy, approaching footsteps. He fired 2 rounds into the electrical panel, sparking a temporary blackout, giving them seconds of cover. He dove into the car, slamming the door shut. Drive! Don't stop! The sedan screeched out of the garage and into the night, the tires smoking. They fled into hiding. Ji Hune was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his arm, but he was alive. Ada was shaken, but the baby was safe. The Mafia king, once untouchable in his tower, was now a fugitive, hunted by his own elders. The war for love had officially begun. Ji Hune spent the next 3 months in deep hiding, moving Ada and his small, loyal cadre of protectors between secure safe houses across the country. Ada's pregnancy advanced, her growing vulnerability fueling Ji Hune's cold, methodical planning. He communicated only through encrypted channels, gathering evidence, consolidating the loyalty of the disillusioned younger syndicate members, and preparing for the inevitable final strike. The elders had become sloppy, their panic making them arrogant. They continued to meet at the ancient traditional council hall, a fortress they believed was impenetrable, relying on tradition and old alliances. Ji Hune knew this was the place to break them. The day came exactly when Ada reached her due date. The timing was deliberate. Ji Hune needed the ultimate motivation. He kissed his heavily pregnant wife goodbye in a sterile, makeshift infirmary hidden in the sublevels of a defunct warehouse. Stay silent, my love, he instructed, his eyes full of fear but his voice steady. When I return, this war will be over. And I will finally hold my daughter, or son. You must come back to me, Ji Hune, Ada pleaded, clinging to his armored vest. Don't let them take you. They cannot, he promised, his voice a low vow. I am already dead without you. I fight to live for you both now. At precisely 2 o'clock, the attack began. Ji Hune stormed the Mafia Council Hall, leading a column of 20 men. Not the syndicate's formal guard, but a force of young, loyal fighters, fast, ruthless, and armed with a cold belief in their new leader. The assault was a full-scale massacre. Knives flashed in the shadows, silencing sentries before they could scream. Gunshots erupted inside the marble corridors, punctuated by the dull, heavy thud of explosive charges Ji Hune's men used to breach the inner sanctum. The elders' old guard fought with desperation, but they lacked the rabid, personal motivation of Ji Hune's forces. Ji Hune himself moved through the chaos like a ghost of vengeance, his focus singular, the council chamber. He found Elder Park and Elder Kim huddled behind a massive mahogany table, their faces pale with terror. You should have retired quietly, Ji Hune announced, his voice echoing in the gun-smoke-filled air. He leveled his weapon at Elder Park. Instead, you ordered the death of my wife and my child. Before he could pull the trigger, one of the Elder's final remaining guards lunged, tackling Ji Hune. They fell to the ground, Ji Hune's gun skittering across the floor. He fought dirty, tearing at the guard's throat, but in the close-quarters struggle, A knife plunged deep into his abdomen, twisting cruelly before being yanked out. Ji Hune roared, the pain a terrifying, white-hot blade that sliced through his focus. He lashed out, breaking the guard's neck with a final, sickening crack, then collapsed onto his knees, gripping the streaming wound in his side. The remaining elders were dealt with by his men. The war was won, the threat neutralized, but Ji Hune could barely see, the loss of blood overwhelming. He struggled to his feet, ignoring the shouts of his lieutenants telling him to stabilize. "The radio," he gasped, leaning heavily on the table. "Ada. Check on Ada now." Miles away, in the dark, cold confines of the warehouse sublevel, Ada had been going through a private hell. The sounds of the distant conflict hadn't reached her, but the anxiety and the exhaustion of months in hiding had triggered the one event they dreaded. Her water broke 10 minutes after Ji Hune left. The small team, the doctor, a lone nurse, and Ji Hune's most trusted security man, Sergeant Han, were calm but frantic. "Sergeant, get me Ji Hune," the doctor yelled, trying to prepare the sterile field. "We need to get her to a hospital." "Negative, doctor," Han replied grimly. "The moment we leave this compound, she's exposed. We deliver here." The king gave his order. Ada was screaming now, gripping the sides of the makeshift bed, the agony eclipsing the fear of the outside world. "Ji Hune," she cried out over and over, needing his strength, needing his touch. The security radio crackled to life, Sergeant Han's voice tense. "King, report. Ada is in full labor. We need extraction for a hospital immediately." Ji Hune, still leaning over the blood-soaked table in the council hall, heard the word labor. The knife wound, the blood loss, the victory. It all vanished. Only the sound of Ada's pain and the imminent arrival of his child existed. "No extraction," he choked out, his voice a broken whisper of agony and urgency. "Stay put. I'm coming to you. Now." He stumbled out of the council hall, ignoring his gaping wound, ignoring his victory. His men rushed to support him, binding the wound loosely, but he pushed them away. He had to reach her. He drove the distance back to the warehouse compound in a terrifying, adrenaline-fueled haze, his vision blurring, his blood soaking the driver's seat. He burst into the infirmary just as the doctor announced, "Push, Mrs. Kong. One last push." Ada screamed, a final, primal sound that tore through the warehouse. Ji Hune fell to his knees beside the bed. He was stabbed, bleeding profusely, his clothes ruined, his face smeared with sweat and soot. He reached for Ada's hand, his own cold and trembling. And then a sound that cut through the chaos, silencing the screams, the guns, and the terror of the underworld. The sharp, healthy cry of a newborn child. Ji Hune watched, shaking, as the doctor swiftly cleaned and examined the infant. Ada collapsed back onto the pillow, gasping, but her eyes were already fixed on the small, squirming bundle. The doctor placed the baby in Ada's arms, a beautiful, tiny girl. Ada wept, a sound of pure, exhausted relief. She looked at her husband, the monster who had returned from the slaughterhouse to witness the miracle. Ji Hune didn't move. He knelt there, the blood pooling around his knees, his entire body trembling violently. He saw the child, saw Ada's radiant, exhausted face, and for the first time since the poison, he felt something so vast, so overwhelming, that it broke him entirely. It was love. Pure, unadulterated, blinding, agony-inducing love for this small, innocent life and the woman who had brought him back to humanity. He collapsed forward, falling against Ada's side, sobbing. His body shook with the sheer force of the emotion. He wasn't crying over the knife wound. He was crying over the 3 years he had lost and the terrifying, beautiful future he had just won back. His first true, unblocked emotion in 3 years was the overwhelming love for his daughter. What a moment. Ji Hune is completely broken, but by love. The elders are gone, the baby is here. Is it finally over? Don't go anywhere. And tell me in the comments, what name should the new Mafia princess have? The warehouse infirmary fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the rhythmic, exhausted breaths of Ada and the tiny, miraculous sounds of the newborn. The doctor and Sergeant Han acted swiftly, pulling Ji Hune away from his wife and beginning immediate, frantic work on his deep abdominal wound. He was fading fast from blood loss, but he fought them weakly, his eyes still fixed on Ada. "I need to see her," he mumbled, his voice thick and barely audible. "Sir, you are dying," the doctor warned, clamping a vessel. "Stay still. You need stitches now." "I am alive," Ji Hune corrected, the truth of the statement more powerful than any threat. "Do your work quickly." They worked around him, stitching, cleaning, and bandaging the king of the underworld while he lay on a secondary gurney, his attention never leaving his wife. The danger of the outside world, the bloodshed in the council hall, the betrayal, it all seemed irrelevant now. Only the tiny life and the exhausted woman mattered. Finally, the crisis passed. Ji Hune's wound was stabilized. Ada was cleaned and resting, the terrible exhaustion replaced by the serene glow of new motherhood. The doctor, a grave man who had witnessed too much violence, lifted the small, bundled infant and walked toward the bed. He placed the baby girl, pink and perfect, in Ada's arms. Ada looked down at her daughter, her face illuminated by a quiet, fierce joy. The infant opened her eyes, dark, deep eyes, already promising strength. Ada brushed a tear from the baby's tiny cheek with a gentle finger. Ji Hune pushed himself off the gurney, ignoring the searing pain in his abdomen, and dragged himself to the bedside. He knelt carefully, his good hand reaching out, his expression a mixture of profound awe and vulnerability. He didn't touch the baby immediately. He looked at Ada, his eyes filling again, though this time the tears were silent and simply overflowed, trailing down his scarred cheeks. "She is beautiful, Ada," he whispered, his voice ravaged. "Thank you. For everything." He carefully touched the baby's tiny hand, so small against his large, calloused fingertip. He felt the terrifying, pure rush of parental love, a feeling so overwhelming it eclipsed all the rage and darkness he had ever known. They smiled, a shared, exhausted, blood-bought smile. Peace, absolute and blinding, settled over the room. The war was over. They had won. They had survived. The light dimmed, casting long, menacing shadows across the concrete floor. A figure limped into the frame. He was cloaked in darkness, but his posture was unnervingly familiar. He leaned heavily against the cold metal doorframe, his breath rattling wetly in his throat. Slow clap. The sound was sharp, mocking, and utterly horrific in the sudden, sacred silence. Ji Hune's head snapped up. His new, sensitized nervous system instantly recognized the sound, the rhythm, the deliberate cruelty of the gesture. "Minso." Ji Hune stared. Minso was alive. His face was a horrifying, asymmetrical mess of burned scars and stitched wounds from the brutal beating Ji Hune had inflicted months ago. His body was stiff, crippled, but his eyes, what Ji Hune could see of them, burned with a pure, psychotic triumph. "A truly magnificent performance, cousin," Minso drawled, his voice a rasping parody of his former smoothness. He took a single, slow, agonizing step into the light. "The elders are gone. The city is yours. You have your foreign queen and your little princess." Minso spat onto the concrete floor. "You thought poisoning you was the end?" he mocked, dragging his ruined body forward with a terrible effort. "You thought my little forgery was my only backup plan?" Ji Hune slowly pushed himself fully upright, his bandaged torso tense, his hand immediately reaching for the weapon he had dropped. But Minso was too far away. "I warned you," Ji Hune growled, his voice low and dangerous, "not to interfere again." "But this is not interfering, brother," Minso smirked, a terrible, scarred grin. "This is finishing what I started 3 years ago. I spent weeks in that cold, disgusting basement, broken and bleeding, only to realize I didn't want the syndicate. I just wanted you to suffer." Minso slowly, agonizingly, reached into the pocket of his tattered, dark coat. His movement was painfully slow, drawing out the terror. "You only lived because I allowed it," Minso whispered, his eyes locked on Ada, who was staring in silent, horrified recognition. "The poison disabled your emotions, yes. But it also left a ticking clock. The antidote you require. I destroyed it months ago." He pulled his hand free. He wasn't holding a knife. He was holding a massive, black, unsilenced revolver. "You came back to life just long enough to know what love is," Minso said, aiming the massive muzzle directly at the center of Ji Hune's chest. "You came back just long enough to feel the true pain of losing it all." "Brother," Ji Hune began, a single word of absolute horror and resignation. Minso's smile widened, revealing bloodied teeth. "You thought it was the end? Brother, it was only the beginning." Ji Hune, driven by the pure, desperate love he had just rediscovered, took a step forward, shielding Ada and the baby with his body, ignoring the ripping pain of his fresh wound. Minso's finger tightened on the trigger. A single, deafening gunshot rips through the silence. Did Ji Hune survive? Did Minso kill the king? Or did he kill the cure? We need answers. Let us know what you think happened in the comments below. If you want to see the terrifying conclusion to the story of his poison, her touch, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.